Hey guys, thanks for clicking on the video. This is Maneuver Life podcast number 11. My name is Dean, and this is my friend Tony. Today we have a really awesome conversation about this subject. Does might make right? Okay, so this is a very old philosophical concept, and we're going to crack it open. We're going to specifically relate it to this situation that just happened the other day with Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump and JD Vance in the White House Oval Office, and how that situation broke down and where it currently stands, and really how we got here. So we have a really good conversation about the history of the conflict and where it stands today, and really who's right or wrong from the perspective of might making right. And then we connected a little bit more into more immediately relatable topics like your work life and your dating life. And really, we also have a great conversation about propaganda and the origin of this term called manufacturing consent and what that means for you and how you can navigate this society with the information flow the way it is. So stick around for the whole conversation. We hope you really enjoy it. And here you go.
Like the video, comment on the video, and subscribe to the channel.
No, no, get that in there. All right. So today I want to talk about there is a philosophical term that is called might makes right. And I think it's very relevant to the modern world. There's a few topics we're going to get into. Specifically, we're going to definitely discuss this recent development with Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky and this sort of fiasco that happened in the Oval Office. So before we do that, I just want to give a quick overview of exactly what might makes right means. It's basically a philosophical term. It originated in the, I think, 400 BC, and throughout the years, basically, it's been written about by different writers like Socrates, Machiavelli, Nietzsche. They've all discussed this topic of power and ethics and how they intertwine. But just to give it in a nutshell, basically what it means is that if you have the power to impose your will, and by you, I mean not necessarily just the individual, but for example, like a state or a government, if they have the power to exert their will and get what they want, are they therefore justified in doing so? Does that alone make it right? And I mean right in a moral sense, and I mean right in a sense of, do I have the right to do that? It's a fairly complex philosophical idea, and the whole podcast isn't going to be about that. But I just want to give a quick overview so that we know where we're at with that. So, kick it over to Tony. Do you have any thoughts on that before we kind of get in earnest?
Yeah, and I like the way you kind of laid that out. And I think might makes right is a twofold question. One is kind of a morality question, which is open for debate. Is open for debate, but a lot of people don't address the elephant in the room for that question, and that is a pragmatic question. So we can talk about the is versus ought distinction, etc. But when I think about might versus right, there's a lot of things I think about, and one of them is yes, we can talk about morality, and yes, that's good, and that's on paper, that's great, but what's happening right now? What is going on today, right now, that I can kind of think about as far as reality and might? How does might play a role in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
So as you pointed out at the top of the episode, we are going to get into specifically the Zelensky and Trump debacle, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
because that in my mind and also in Dean's mind, we both immediately said, hey, this is exactly what we're thinking about. We can definitely relate the might versus right question, if you will, into kind of this angle. So, I think I think that's a good way. That's a good way to start it off. And I think if you want to, we can just segue kind of right into that area. But I don't
Sure.
know.
Yeah, why not? Let's just jump right into it. So, actually, let me have you recap. So, just for people
Yeah,
who aren't aware, and in fact, if you're not aware, then I feel like it's hilarious that you're watching our podcast, but you're like not plugged into something like
yeah,
this. But just in case, Tony, what exactly happened in the Oval Office?
yeah, yeah. So this week, Trump and Zelensky they met up and they had a discussion. And JD Vance was there as well. And this was in the White House. And they met up and the goal was to negotiate a situation where the outcome of peace would be attained. And how would they attain that regarding the conflict in Ukraine and Russia currently, right? And so, what we saw as a public, we didn't see the backroom discussion. We only saw what happened on, in the media and during the kind of the interview phase where the media was asking questions to Trump and JD Vance and Zelensky himself. And during that time, Zelensky actually used that as an opportunity to sort of clip farm for
Yeah.
you know his agenda. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, what that means is that's, hey, let me go on somebody else's bigger platform and try to make a viral clip to where people were literally going to make this clip go viral and say, hey, I can't believe this happened. Let's talk about this and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it worked obviously because it is a viral clip, but I don't think it worked in his favor, and we'll get into that and get into why. But first, let me kind of explain what actually transpired. So JD Vance was asked a question about, hey, how are the negotiations going? Like, what's going on with the negotiations? Like, how are we going to get to peace? And he was interrupted by Zelensky when he was explaining certain things about what was going on with the negotiations. And Zelensky said something to the effect of, hey, here's the history of the situation. Russians invaded our country in 2014, and you're not talking about that and this, that, and the other. And we're going to dive into the history a little bit later here, but just for right now, just kind of for the context of this, some of that is, well, all of what he said was from his perspective and from the Ukrainian perspective of what happened. And he's missing the other half of the picture, right? So he gave that, and this was on national television for United States media. So
Yeah.
this was seen as a rude interruption or a rude kind of clip farming attempt in Trump and JD Vance's domain, in their house, literally. And again, this is something that if we went to, let's say we had an interview in Russia or in Ukraine or in China, if we interrupted them to give our little variant or our version of the historical events of what transpired in, let's say, the Tiananmen Square or what have you, we're not going to be allowed to. That's not going to be aired. We're not going to be allowed to talk about that. We'll be punished for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was rewarded by certain people and what have you for doing this. Anyway, to kind of get to the end of this, he did some clip farming and he did kind of push back and stuff. Trump allowed it to occur. Trump said, "Hey, let me just kind of let JD Vance handle this for a few minutes to see what's going on." But at the end of the conversation, Trump said, "Hey, I only allowed this to go this far because I want the people to see Zelensky's true colors, and this man does not want peace." Okay. And after the clip went viral, Trump tweeted, or maybe truthed, basically a long statement saying, "I have come to the determination that Zelensky does not want peace at this time." And so we need to kind of readdress the situation moving forward and how we analyze it and how we handle it. So Trump got a little bit upset about how he was behaving in that situation, rightfully so, because it was a bit rude. And 72 hours later, we can discuss what happened, but that's basically the nutshell of what happened on the clip.
Yeah.
So kicking it back over to you, I think if you want to give some of a broader context of kind of what's really going on in the Russia-Ukraine kind of conflict, I would like you to kind of give a top-down example of that, or an explanation of what was going on. So
Sure. So that was a great, in a nutshell, explanation. And just to quickly add on to that, I just felt like the Americans, as everybody watching this is most likely American, Trump and JD Vance, like you said, they viewed this as a very disrespectful thing to do. And the conclusion they drew from that, of course, is that Zelensky does not really care about peace, right? And I happen to agree with that. And to help understand why, I'm just going to quickly give an explanation of how did we get to this point. So I'm not just talking about how the war started, but why are Russia and the United States so like enemies today, and why are we even aligned with Ukraine at all? Why do we care about something that's going on halfway across the world? We have no real security interests in Ukraine. It doesn't matter whether Ukraine is controlled by Russia or the Ukrainians. It really does not affect us at all. So why do we care at all? Well, you kind of have to go back to the end of the Cold War, okay? So back in the 1990s, the Soviet Union collapsed, and before the Soviet Union collapsed, there was Russia, and then a bunch of surrounding states they call the Balkans, right? And these little states in between, and that included Ukraine, it included like Poland, Hungary, countries like this served as like a buffer zone between the West, so Europe and the United States, and the Russian homeland, right? So Russia felt very secure in this setup because if you want to, let's say, attack Moscow, there's a ton of land and a ton of little small countries you'd have to go through first to even get there. So this was a very secure situation. Now, when the Soviet Union collapsed, all of these little countries in between Russia and the West suddenly were on their own, okay? And they may or may not have wanted to align with Russia. A lot of them were not very happy with Russia. So now these are like the states that have animosity towards them. And so part of the agreements to like respect the new Russian government after the fall of the Soviet Union was the West promised, like, hey, we have this thing called NATO, which already existed. It was formed back in the 40s. And this is a defensive alliance that the United States and a bunch of European countries have set up. So what we'll do is, in order to help you set up your country and be more democratic and be more like the Western countries, we'll promise not to threaten your security. In the meantime, we're going to give you peace. We're going to give you space to develop. You won't have to worry about us. And we won't expand NATO eastward. So the phrase that was used, it's a famous phrase, was not 1 inch eastward. So NATO is here. NATO is in the West. We're going to stay there. We're not going to keep expanding. Well, we pretty much started breaking that immediately, right? And by we, I mean the United States and the rest of NATO. NATO started expanding eastward basically right away. We started gobbling up Poland, Hungary, other Baltic states. We gobbled up into NATO, and you see how the border is pushing closer and closer to Russia. And at every stage of the way here, Russia specifically said, stop, don't do that. Like, we see this, we see what you're doing, and it doesn't matter what you say you're doing. What we see it as is a provocation. We see you inching closer and closer to our borders, and it makes us feel insecure. Now, back then, Russia was still recovering from the fall of the Soviet Union. They weren't really strong enough to do anything about it. Otherwise, we may have seen this war happen in the 90s if Russia was capable of it, but they weren't. That's not the case today. So to fast forward a little bit, and I'll try to wrap this up, but I think it's a useful history lesson, is in 2014, I'll go to 2014. So in 2014, basically Russia and Ukraine were friendly, okay? The Russian president at the time was pro-Russian. The Ukrainian president at the time was pro-Russian. So they had a pretty good relationship, and they were neutral. So they were not members of NATO, but they also were not necessarily allied with Russia, but they were friendly, they were on good terms, which is what you want in a border state situation. They were friendly. Well, that president lost the election. In fact, he was pushed out. Let's be honest with you. He was forced out. Who took over was a gentleman named Vladimir Zelensky. Important correction I have to make here. The president that I'm speaking about in this clip is Viktor Yanukovych. He was forced to flee Ukraine in 2014 after the Euromaidan protests. It was April of that year, March and April of that year, that Russia began their military escalations in the Donbass region. And then a election was held in May of 2014, where somebody named Petro Poroshenko was actually elected, not Zelensky. Zelensky did not get elected until 2019. However, Petro Poroshenko was also a pro-Western president. He escalated the alliance with the European Union and began the process of joining the European Union, which is obviously adjacent to NATO. So my overall point stands, but I wanted to get those details right, and I'm the one editing this, so I decided to put this in. Okay. Now, Zelensky was elected, okay, on a platform of anti-Russia, pro-NATO. Okay, so he was propped up by the Western governments specifically because he was friendly towards the West. So immediately, Russia responded. And what did they do? They started bolstering, and by bolstering, I mean providing arms and military support to insurgent groups, terrorist groups in what's called the Donbass region. So this is the region right on the border between Ukraine and Russia, a very Russian region ethnically. They speak a lot of Russian there. There's a lot of sentiment in this area, although it's arguable how much, but there's a lot of sentiment in this area of like pro-Russia, and we don't want to be part of Ukraine. So Russia basically stoked that in order to start a conflict. And they wanted to start a conflict to make sure that Ukraine was not an attractive option to NATO. NATO doesn't want a country that's unstable. They don't want to enter a war. At least this is what Putin thought, right? So he destabilized the country. Since 2014, there's been skirmishes, there's been wars, there's been fighting, and they've tried many times. Both sides have tried to set up peace talks and so-called ceasefires. Every single one of them has failed. Both sides blame the other one for those. But fast forward to now 2022. Actually, maybe was it 2021 when the invasion started?
2021.
Yeah. 2021. NATO and Ukraine are just getting too close for comfort. So Putin does what he did. He amassed an army at the border and invaded. And so now we have a full-scale war. And in my view, hopefully this explanation wasn't too long. It explains how this came to be. Okay, so however you view this, Russia felt insecure and they did not like NATO's advances, and they responded with their might. Okay, which brings us to the main topic of the conversation. Might makes right. Right? How did this happen?
Right.
That's my explanation. So anything
Right.
like
And
that.
to add a little bit of stuff and I love that bottom up explanation you had in my mind because that's perfectly well put. And I do believe Boris Johnson had a role in sort of extending this war, and we can get into that later. But there's a little bit of stuff there going on. What I do want to touch on is that during this, and again, this is kind of a historical context, right? So for those of us that have this viewpoint, and basically by viewpoint I mean this is the way that we observe the kind of what happened. We haven't even given an opinion on it yet. We were just saying this is what happened, right?
Right.
About 50% of our country doesn't even know or agree with that those are the facts that we're working with, right?
Right.
So there's a common talking point right now where if you say exactly what Dean just said or anything to the effect of it, and no opinion, just, hey, this is what happened so far. If you say it in the way he said it, you're going to be called a Russian asset, or you're going to be called a Putin shill, or people are going to say you're being paid by Putin as a kind of tactic to discredit what you're saying. And I mean, obviously, we're not paid by Putin. Like we have 12 subscribers.
Yeah,
and
I was
Putin's
gonna
not one of
say,
them.
we have 12 subscribers.
It's not.
Yeah.
And again, I don't like Putin. I don't like Zelensky. It's not like I'm picking. And again, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I'm pretty damaged at controlling those of you who are just going to say, well, he's just paid by Putin and this, that, and the other. I mean, we have 12 subscribers. I mean, you guys can make that 13, 14, 15 if you just click the subscribe button right now.
Please
But
do. Yeah.
we have, what I'm saying is we're not paid by Putin. No. That's all I'm going to say there.
We're not paid by anybody.
Yeah, exactly. So, but to kind of go a little bit further with this, so wrapping it back up to kind of circling back to what happened in the Trump office, Zelensky kind of made a statement, and this is what set Trump off, which was something to the effect of evil will be on your doorstep soon, even though you're surrounded by water, don't be so cocky or whatever. And Trump said, hold on a minute. You don't get to tell us when evil's going to approach us. You're not telling us that. Okay.
Right.
You don't have chips to play, like you don't have cards to play, etc. And this was Trump kind of recognizing, hey, I need to kind of step in here. This dog is off his leash. Let me kind of put him back on. Because in that room, even physically speaking, in that room, like the body language of Zelensky, he was like leaning in.
Yeah.
Leaning in like, evil will be on your doorstep.
Right. Arms crossed. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And Trump is just kind of, in a way, in that room, might equals right. Like he's trying to just be the alpha in the room, and he says, hey, hang on a minute. This is my house. Kind of like Obama said it famously when he had that Islamic heckler, when he said, hey, hold up. You're in my home. And everyone claps and stuff. That's a great viral clip. And that exactly is. That's might equals right there.
Right.
So kind of going off what you said, and, Minsk 2 and Boris Johnson, et cetera, like this war, in my view, is being extended for monetary reasons to kind of enrich. This is the opinion part. To enrich the oligarchy, to enrich the military-industrial complex that we all know about. I mean, that's why I think the war is being extended. I don't think it's being extended for any reason of. It's not to save peace and to save lives. I don't think that we are funding this war in effect to save lives, and that's the narrative that I was told. Hey, the more money we give to Ukraine, the more lives will be saved. But if you look at like the numbers, and it's a tragic thing going on, the number of deaths that have occurred. Yeah. It's a war, right? It's a terrible thing going on, and I would like to live in a world without war, but we all live in the same world, right? We can't just get around the fact that war exists. It's a terrible thing. So, kind of using that to segue into what should be done, and what do you think should have been done in that meeting? Like, do you agree with what Trump said and how he handled it? And then do you disagree with how Zelensky kind of approached it? And
well,
I guess number 3 is, what would you have said if you were Zelensky and you were operating in good faith? Let's kick it over to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you made a good point, because you pointed out that even in the room when this was happening, this event we're talking about, Trump basically sunned Zelensky, right? Like, he put him in his place in that room. Why was he able to do that? Because the United States is the stronger country, and Ukraine needs the United States' help for whatever. And really, if you want to take it to the extreme, Ukraine needs the United States' permission to exist. All right, now that's crazy to say. But it is true, because if the United States chose to, we could invade Ukraine and take over the country in about 48 hours, right? if we chose to. Now, we wouldn't really want to do that. That would cost a lot of money. It would cost a lot of lives. It's not a good decision, not a thing we should do. But I'm just saying that it's possible. So in that room, that's obvious. That's obvious to everybody sitting there. And it's especially obvious because Zelensky is literally there with his hand out asking for American support. Okay. There's nothing different between that and Ukraine's position with regards to Russia. Russia, if they did want to go all out, and you can say whatever you want about this war, Russia is not fighting with their full strength. Okay, it's because, and it's for the exact same reason. Putin, that's not a politically wise thing to do, to go like full scale war. It's not going to make his people happy. Nobody really wants to do that. So he's sort of waging this like 40-50% strength against Ukraine, and honestly, even that would be enough, except for the fact that NATO and the United States has been sending billions and billions of dollars to keep them afloat, military equipment, etc. So you made a perfect point when you said that. Everybody knows in this situation that might makes right. But Zelensky has gotten so used to being propped up by the daddy, United States and NATO, that he's forgotten his place. He really has forgotten the truth of the situation here, which is that he has no cards to play. It's exactly the words Trump used. You have no cards. You're here because we let you be here, and we're helping you. At this point, we're helping you because we just want peace. We don't want this war to continue. Now, the previous administration literally did want the war, right? And why did they want the war? Maybe we should talk about it. Maybe I'll let you expound on exactly why they wanted this to happen. But I just wanted to add that point there. It was, everybody knows this.
No, and I like that. And I think I do want to answer that question, but before I jump into that, I do want to ask myself and you to Steelman sort of, because I want to give some charitability to Zelensky. I'm going to try to. I do believe he's a sociopath in some respects, or maybe a psychopath. But I'm going to try to pretend that I don't believe that, just for the sake of not being biased.
Yeah.
I think let's assume that Zelensky is this kind of Braveheart type figure that Lex Friedman calls him, and like all these people say he's having a beer with all of his army guys, like he's having a beer with all of his soldiers, like he's just in there. He stayed in his capital while he was being invaded, even though he was being told not to.
Right.
So you get the picture of him having the beer with the soldiers, and you get to put on Reddit, and there's like a Marvel kind of caption. The next Marvel movie will be about Zelensky, and like he's good, Putin's evil.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so let me put myself in the shoes of somebody like who thinks that, and think, how would I have handled this differently, right? You're still in a tough spot, right? Let's say you're Braveheart Zelensky, and you're in the White House right now, begging for more money or begging for more missiles or whatever. I don't know why you're there, begging for you're there because you have to be there. If your goal is truly to be that Braveheart Zelensky and take back all the land that has already been taken back from you, and end this war in the best way for yourself, you have to remember there's a part of you that's trying to think, okay, I'm not in full control of my guys here. And why I say that is because when Trump pushed back on him, and when when Trump said, hey, you're trying to start World War III over this, what are you doing? Let's at least get a ceasefire. And Zelensky kind of said, and he kind of said it quietly, but he said, my guys won't listen to a ceasefire. They're not going to implement a ceasefire. What that tells me is that your guys don't follow your orders, so you're not the head guy in charge. So even in this little situation, like, you can't even control. Exactly. So that makes me think that he fears, he fears his soldiers, he fears his guys.
Right.
So how are you going to get out of the situation untethered, right, unscathed? So I guess that's the angle where I'm thinking, okay, if you're that Braveheart figure, then yeah, you got to go up on TV and say, hey, let me clip farm, let me raise awareness, and let me attempt to. Otherwise, I can only assume and believe that he was coached by some kind of liberal or military industrial complex type lobbyist to say, hey, try to go gather as much sentiment or manufacture as much consent for this war to keep going.
Yeah.
And here's how you're going to do it. So I think he was coached into doing that. So I do want to answer your question on why the war is happening. But before I do that, I want to kick it back over to you if you have a brief analysis or brief kind of other perspective on kind of what I just asked.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I'll unsteelman Zelensky a little bit here, right? I'm just going to use the strongest possible terms. Okay. I think Zelensky is a demon. Okay. I think Zelensky is a creature who only cares about war and destruction, right? I think that from the beginning, he has been a warmonger. He has been unreasonable. He has been completely steel-headed. I mean, he is committed to sending every last Ukrainian man to die on the front lines of this battlefield. Why? Because that's why he's in power. He got elected on this platform of anti-Russia. If there's no conflict with Russia, there's no point to have Zelensky, and he knows that. There's no other reason to have Zelensky in power except for the fact that he hates Russia. And for anybody listening, I'll never recommend Lex Friedman to anybody, but he did do one of the few like long form Western interviews with Zelensky, and I think it's worth listening to simply because you can hear in Zelensky's own words how impossible he is to deal with. Every time Lex tries to bring up like, yeah, okay, I get it, you have your grievances, but listen, people are dying. This war's gone on too long. Shouldn't there be some attempt to find peace? Every time Lex brings that up, Zelensky responds with, we can't respond. We can't have peace with Russia. Russians are animals. They're all monsters. Putin, he says this about Putin. Putin is a demon. Putin only wants war. He can't be talked to. He can't be reasoned with. Ukraine will never be safe until Putin is dead or out of power. These are insane words. And by the way, another thing Zelensky has done from the beginning of this war is basically say he will not negotiate peace with Russia until Putin is out of office, which is ridiculous. That will never happen, and he knows it. He knows that Putin isn't going anywhere. He's well liked in Russia. He's a powerful leader. He's very strong, and the Russian people like him. He has a strong staff who all seem to respect him. He's not going anywhere. If you want Putin out, you need to conquer Russia and do it yourself. And Zelensky knows that. So by saying I'm only going to negotiate if Putin's out, that's the same thing as saying I'm refusing to negotiate. I just want war forever, just forever, because that outcome is impossible. So that outcome is impossible. That means the war never ends. Okay, so that's my anti-Steelman. But yeah, I'll throw it back to you.
To provide some more kind of like just some more context to this too. Putin has said in multiple interviews, and yes, I've listened to Putin interviews because you listen to both sides, you listen to everything.
Yeah.
Putin has said in multiple interviews, hey, and he said this on day one, or even before day one. Our goal is to denazify Ukraine. Okay, we all know that's bullshit, right?
Right.
We all know that's a tactic that you say because that's an unmeasurable goalpost that you can allow yourself to endlessly, if you want to, be invading the country, right? So if you say, hey, I'm gonna do X, Y, I'm gonna step on your foot, and I'm only gonna let go of my foot when we denazify you. Well, how do we know what that means? That's a vague thing, right? That's a perfect tactic, and that's similar to what you just said. Zelensky is saying, hey, until Putin is out of office, I'm not going to negotiate peace. That is exactly the same thing, but a lower IQ version of it, and I'll give you reasons why. Yeah. There is some truth to the denazify claim. I think it's a little ridiculous, but there are some kind of quote-unquote neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, and this was pointed out, and the reason I know about this is because the liberal media was talking about this in 2016, 2017. Right. We got Ro Khanna saying, hey, there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine. You know what I'm saying? And then it would give me screenshots of all these pictures of like these battalion, I forgot the name, the Azov battalion members, saying stuff like, hey, this, that, and the other, and whatever. And they were doing their little reporting on it for clicks, and this was 2017, 2018. And then the same guys, Ro Khanna, same guy in 2021, says we need to endlessly, fund the endless destruction of, I'm not quoting him literally at this point, but he basically was turning to the other side and saying what you guys are all saying, if you're all repeating like the talking points from CNN and even Fox News. We need to, be part of this war and stuff, and, go Ukraine. But the reality is that they have a Nazi problem, and that's what Putin is saying, right? It's not a big problem to a point where I think it's something that needs to go to war over, but it's a small detail that matters and can be used in propaganda wars, which we'll get into in part 3 of this episode. But just putting that out there because I do like what you said about how he just has an endless. I don't like that he has that. Let me walk that back. I don't like that he has an endless warmongering need, but it's what he's doing. Yeah. And so I do agree with you that there's some level of sociopathy or some psychopathy there. That's part 1. But part 2, you keep saying words like elected and you're using scare quotes. I get that. But I know that he was installed, right? We have Victoria Nuland kind of admitting that on tape. So there is nobody that will be able to tell me that's disinformation. That's misinformation. I know it's true. God is real. I know Zelensky was installed. That's kind of where I'm. You see what I'm saying? So it's like one of those truths. That's like a truth 0, truth 1, whatever. Yes. So he was installed by United States CIA. Like that's what happened. So now this is the opinion part, right? Like you can say, oh, well, this, that, and the other, Putin talking points. But no. So with all that said, all of what we just discussed, and then going back to kind of in the White House, you're sitting there and you're pretty much being bitch slapped, for lack of a better term.
Right.
72 hours later, you get Zelensky saying, "Hey, I'm going to tweet something that was approved by Trump," and said in the tweet that I made, I'm going to kind of thank Trump for the javelins because he made that a big deal. He said, "You're not being so thankful at all. How come you're not even You should be thanking us."
Right.
72 hours later, he tweets, "And I do want to say thank you so much for the javelins. It saved a lot of lives. La, la, la. My name is Vladimir Zelensky." La, la, la. So he tweeted that and got that out of the way, and that's a statement. Like he did capitulate, right?
Right.
And for those people in that kind of liberal haze and that woke mind virus haze of the Trump derangement syndrome, during those 72 hours between that and the tweet, they were all saying, "Oh my God, Trump, this is so evil, and I can't believe the way he's treated." It's not, because they don't understand reality, right? But then those of us who knew what was going to happen, like Dean predicted it, and it wasn't even an impressive prediction when he said it to me. That's why I was like, whatever.
Right.
He said,
Yeah.
"Well, he's going to capitulate. Let's give it some time." And 72 hours later, he sends me the tweet, and I'm like, "Yeah, I mean that's like when you tell me when I see a cloud up in the sky, and I'm like, it might rain.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not impressive.
This guy's
It's not
plugged
impressive.
in. Yeah, this guy's plugged in
Yeah.
for sure.
It's not impressive." So going to, I do want to answer your question about like why I think the war is going on, and then I would like to get your opinion.
Sure.
But I think we don't live in an actual democracy situation right now. I think we're living in more of like sort of a uniparty kind of oligarchy style. 100 people probably run the country instead of like the 538 that you think kind of run it.
Yeah.
And these are big members of lobbyist groups such as the weapons industry. So I think that's a big part of it. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, these kind of companies, they have like these lobbyists that kind of revolving door situation with Congress. Some of them are in Congress and then all of a sudden are on the board a couple of years later, and then they're multimillionaires. How did that happen? Well, maybe they were really good at stock investing. Who knows? But the fact is that those companies kind of can influence the lawmakers, and the lawmakers will say, "Hey, I'm going to vote yes on this $100 billion package," where if you ask an average citizen, they're too uninformed to actually vote on that, so they don't even put that up to a ballot. That's just a little electoral college thing where it's, hey, should we give $100 billion or $150 billion? That's their argument, right? And then to me and you, I'm thinking, should we buy this wireless mic or should we just use the thing I already have?
Yeah.
Because we're too dumb to make decisions at the $100 billion level, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I think is these companies have a very, very vested interest in the destruction of Ukraine and the destruction of Russia, because BlackRock has already signed a deal to go and rebuild Ukraine. This was like before 2022 happened. They already had they already got their pen wet, if you will. They already signed the deal. So it's like it doesn't take a genius to know that they're financially gaining from this tragic situation. And so when you see it from that perspective, that's the only thing that makes sense to me, is that it is obvious that these people benefit financially from this war. Maybe they didn't start and cause the war, but they want to make it last as long as possible. So they're paying these lobbyists to pay to donate to the campaigns of the senators and the House of Representatives to vote yes on this $100 billion package to send to Ukraine for these contracts. Kick it back over to you. Like, what do you think about like my answer, and how does it differ from yours?
Yeah, so I don't have any disagreement with what you just said. I will just simply try to add like sort of the other side of the coin. So what you have is not everybody in power is actually in power. A lot of people who are in power are basically also just puppets. So these are like propagandized just as much as your neighbor who's posting CNN articles on Facebook. There's literally Congress people who are on the same tier, right? They're not in the know. They're not plugged in. They don't have any connections. They're simply lemmings who are controlled by the people who are actually in power. So, but these people also have the vote, right, to decide where this money's going and why it should be distributed, even though they're not getting a cut of it, right? They're nobody. They get nothing. But they're propagandized, and I think the propaganda version of this is the United States. Let me back up a little bit. So it's kind of like three tiers. So there's the truth, which is what we've been talking about, the truth of what's actually going on. And then there's like the actual propaganda version that gets peddled to the people of the United States, which is we have to save democracy, right? That's that complete bullshit. But then there's like a middle tier bullshit that gets fed to like the people who have power but don't actually get anything out of it. So this middle tier bullshit is the United States needs to antagonize Russia so that we can remain strong on a world scale. So this is like a projection of power. So yes, we know we're antagonizing Russia, and yes, we know that the war is not for the stated reason of preserving democracy, but it's still a good thing because we're poking Russia and we're making them miserable, and we're going to make it harder for them to develop. We're going to hurt Putin's image in the country by dragging him into a forever war. So that's like the middle tier bullshit reason. So it's really a combination of those two things. The money, I think, is the actual fact of the situation. I mean, you pointed out that, what was it, BlackRock had a contract to rebuild Ukraine already. So that means
they've already signed it.
That means that the more destruction in the country from this point forward, the better it is for BlackRock. They actually are financially gaining from as much destruction as possible, right? It's just nakedly true. It's just nakedly true. So I don't have anything else to add to that. I think that's it.
Well, I do have a question for you to break character a little bit here. Do you think it's interesting that when you and I were growing up, we would literally, as a country, go to war and not directly, but murder children as collateral damage in the name of saving democracy, in the name of fighting for your rights? Mm-hmm. But nowadays, we're having people go to jail for posting something on Twitter.
I mean,
isn't that an interesting little paradigm shift?
You know, it's like what we talked about last week with the little lies leading to big lies, right? It's like a landslide of bullshit that happens. So it starts off with just one or two little rocks breaking loose, and maybe it's even controlled, like somebody just kicked it down the hill. But very quickly, it's a mountain of just horse shit just being fed down our throats. So yeah, I think it's all connected to that.
I think it's definitely a weird contrast, because at least when I grew up, at least they lied, at least they pretended to say, hey, we're fighting democracy. Yeah, but nowadays you have like 100 multiple cases in the UK where people are just literally going to jail because they posted something on Facebook.
Right. Yeah, that's the West. You know, I saw a tweet, I don't know who it was, so I won't credit them because I don't know. But he basically made a joke. He's like, you know, it would be terrible if Putin wins, because then he'll conquer Russia. And what will happen then? Then we won't have any democracy. People will get thrown in jails for tweeting. Then there will be people getting stabbed every other day in the streets, and all rights will be taken away, right? And you know, it's just who's winning? Who's winning even? Who's even in charge?
It's funny because you even subconsciously said Putin, but I think you meant to say Zelensky, right?
No, I meant Putin. Like if Putin wins and he'll conquer Europe. Because that's the fear that they and if Putin conquers Russia, Europe, everything will be terrible, right?
Yeah, exactly. As if it's already not. Yeah, okay, I
exactly. Yeah.
No, it's funny because I was thinking the other way. I'm thinking, oh no, it'd be so awesome if Zelensky won, because then we can start banning Christians in Russia. Then we could start kind of not having any elections in Russia, just like in Ukraine. That's kind of where my brain was going. I'm like, is that what you're saying?
But yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Perfectly two sides of the same coin. Yeah. But I think to kind of double click on what you just said near the end of how you were answering kind of the why of it. So I think it segues us into actually number 3 instead, if we skip into that, because you did say there's a truth layer and then there's a propaganda layer that gets kind of stifled to the people, right? Yeah. And a lot of the people, even congressmen, as you said, they're not even, I think that some of the congressmen aren't even as dialed in as you. The way you broke down that situation in sort of a Jeffrey Sachs like level style, I don't think a lot of the congressmen even know kind of those facts or agree with you on those facts.
Not. Yeah.
So, yeah. And you can go even further and say, hey, what about the bombing of Belgrade? Let's go there. But there's so many things to get into, and in my opinion, there's just too much stuff to get into with this stuff. There's too many details. As a details guy, I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. But like as a citizen who has a job and I've got things going on, I've got a wife and stuff, I can't plug myself into every little detail.
It's a nightmare, dude. Like I did my best to. Like I think I spoke for like 8 minutes, and that was as brief as I could make it. Right? Like there's so much.
I don't think I could have done 8 minutes. Yeah. I think Jeffrey Sachs did 20 minutes, and even that was like he left a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a lot of people out there that just don't want to think about this stuff, so they elect congressmen to think about it for them, which I get it. But these congressmen aren't thinking about it in my mind. They're being paid, and it's obvious. So. Yeah. But let's talk about truth and how it differs from propaganda, and kind of let's go. What do you think about going into that section here?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Keep the conversation moving here, but what did you want to start with there? I'll let you.
Well, I think because you made a really good point. You said there's truth, right, which is what happens, and then there's propaganda, which is what's stifled through. How does your country or how does your media filter that and put it to your words? So I'll give you one example, and I talked about it earlier at the top of the show. So there might be like a YouTube. For context, little misinformation container below our video.
Yeah, link to a Wikipedia article. Yeah.
Right. So that's what really happened in Tiananmen Square, right? So like that whole situation is like, okay, as a Westerner, as somebody who grew up in the United States, I was taught this, that, and the other happened there. I was taught, hey, at Tiananmen Square, this happened. Okay. And I was like, oh, that's a fact. And then I listened to that System of a Down song,
Why don't you
Hypnotize or
ask the
whatever.
kids? Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a little bit. Then I was like, okay, this is what happened at Tiananmen. I know exactly what happened there. Little to my knowledge, I didn't even know what propaganda was because I was just a kid. So then I grow up. I'm going to college, and I've got a Chinese classmate. Becomes a close friend of mine. Actually, we become roommates. I start talking to him, and I'm like, hey man, so what happened at Tiananmen Square? Boom. Immediately he puts his phone on airplane mode, grabs my phone, puts my phone on airplane mode, and says, hey, we'll talk about it. And so he gets into his version of it, and I'm like, interesting. That's a completely different version than what I was taught, when I was a kid. So it made me think, what else was I taught differently than what they're taught? And what is a third party source that doesn't have a vested interest in the other country's general morale going down, right? So what I mean by that is the United States has a vested interest in the general consensus of China going down. So, and I don't agree with that, but that's what the United States' strategy is, right?
Right.
So through that lens, I started questioning what really happened with that, and then you start asking all these other questions, like what happened with Tibet, what happened with
Right.
Taiwan, what happened with all this stuff, what happened with the Uyghurs, what happened in Russia, what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Yemen, what happened in Syria, what happened in Somalia, Libya, what happened there.
Right.
But the list goes on, and as we said earlier, there's too much details to get into. But kicking it over to you, did you have an aha moment where you kind of had a version of events that transpired in your life, and then you kind of looked into it further and said, hey, I was lied to by my government or by my media?
So it didn't happen in my lifetime, but the thing that really woke me up to this is a very good book that I would recommend strongly to anybody. It's called Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky and one other guy. I forget his name, but we've already sorry to that guy. I think he's dead. But my bad. Yeah. Anyway, I think we already said that term, manufacturing consent, before, and I think it's a beautiful term. And if you're confused about what it means, it's that consent of the governed, which is basically what allows the government to control us, is because we let them do it, right? That consent has to be manufactured. You have to build that up. You have to, basically, the government has to do something to prove that they're worthy of that control. So manufacturing consent is just a fantastic book that they think they focus mostly on the Vietnam War, but they talk about other things. And I read their analysis and their breakdown of the facts of what actually happened during the Vietnam War, and compared to the way the media portrayed it, and it's not the same story, right? And I don't just mean like the details are different. I mean the entire story is different. Every fact was manipulated, twisted, to keep the American public in a certain frame of view. And it's almost like the facts only exist to be molded by the media, right? Like they take this raw material, which is the truth, and then they mold it like clay, and they put it into whatever shape they want it to be in, so that the American people see what they want them to see. This is how the media and the government work in tandem with this. I mean, you literally have, think about this, the White House press corps, right? And very recently there's been a big change to this, which I'm very supportive of. But the White House press corps, in order to get credentialed access to join the press corps, and this is, by the way, this is who's in the conference room when whoever the spokesperson for the White House is like speaking and giving the news items of the day. The people in that room, in order to get in there, you have to be approved by the people in the room. Well, this is how it used to work. It used to be that the White House press corps chose their own members, right? Which, how does that, why? Why would the media have control over who gets to become the media, right? That's basically what they did. And
Right.
this is very recently changed. Again, I think is a huge victory, but this is kind of how the media works. The government has their little stenographers, right? And the government will even give them power. It's like throwing a treat to your dog. It's like, hey, you've been a good little servant of mine. Here's a little morsel of power. And as long as you use it to benefit me, right, which I'm giving you this power, so I know you're not going to let anybody in here who would contradict me or say anything I don't want them to say, because if you do that, I'm going to take this power away from you. So
Right.
here's a little crumb, use it wisely, and maybe I'll give you more, right? This is what the media does. They're like the lapdogs of the people who are truly in power. And it's all a trickle down from there. You have academia doing the same kind of thing. In order to get grants, in order to fund their research, in order to get bigger endowments, they they churn out students who are lemmings, who are very compliant. This happens in the corporate world. If I want tax breaks, if I want to lobby the government, I better be on my dotting my I's and crossing my T's. I better make sure I'm in lockstep with whatever they want from me. So this is a power structure that goes through every facet of society.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's interesting you bring it up like that because just recently there was a lawsuit, I believe, from the Associated Propaganda, the Associated Press.
Yeah.
They weren't allowed in some capacity of the White House media kind of room because they weren't admitting that they weren't calling it the Gulf of America. I don't know if you heard about this
Right.
story.
Yes, that's right.
But
Yep.
they had to sue the White House and say, hey, like this, that, and the other, like they gotta let us in because they didn't want to capitulate and say like, oh, it's actually called the Gulf of America. I agree.
Right.
You know?
They took their little stand. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny, and again, you get all these subreddits that say, oh, we're gonna ban any access to Twitter because Elon Musk, did a Sig Heil or whatever.
Right.
It's like so. If you're watching this, stop and never go on Reddit ever again. Never go on Reddit.
Yeah.
Never go on like any of these like platforms that say, hey, we're gonna take a political stance. The thing is, a browser, Firefox, is. We talk about that if you want, but Firefox, little tangent. There's a little bit of a news in Firefox recently where they updated their TOS and hey, they added a couple lines about how they can now use your data and sell your data and stuff. And for the whole time, Firefox was this whole free open source thing, and they would like say, hey, we're championing like privacy. We don't want to mess with your data and sell your data.
Yeah.
We're never going to sell your data. We're never going to do this and that and the other. And they just recently changed their TOS to say, hey, we kind of maybe can sell your data. And that's freaking everybody out, and that's a good point. Everybody should be mad and this and that and the other, but you don't want to like you're a browser, okay? We don't care about your politics. So, and when I bring that up is because they also have a situation where they're saying, hey, we're not just a browser company. We're Mozilla. We are outwardly a woke company, meaning we are outwardly like funding woke studies, and just gonna leave it at that. But they're not a political. I don't care. I don't want my internet browser to be a political thing. I want it to use like a browse the internet. So if I have a situation where if I see Mozilla saying, hey, we're going to fund woke studies and stuff, how am I to know that they're not changing certain things the way how I browse the internet? Yeah. It's like I come to you guys because you're supposed to be quote unquote secure and data, not going to sell my data. I have to download a special user.js file to case harden my Firefox so it's like more secure. But what I mean by where I'm going with this is get off Reddit because it's been politicized to a point when we've talked about this earlier. It's a Skinner box to where it rewards people that say what needs to be said and what the government wants them to say. Yeah. I have no doubt in my mind the government funds Reddit. I have no doubt in my mind they're on there. There's probably people that are working for the CIA, FBI, etc. that are posting and doing research and development on Reddit to see, hey, how can we astroturf this? How can we make Kamala look better? How can we do this and that? Make Trump look bad.
Did you know that Ghislaine Maxwell was like one of Reddit's top users? Did you know that?
Oh.
Yeah,
I did not know that. I did not know that.
She was like had one of the highest karma accounts on the whole website. She was her.
I did not know that. Yeah, that's crazy.
By the way, if you probably know, but if anybody watching doesn't know, Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a CIA operative and a known, well-known, very popular CIA operative. So anyway, that's it.
And I like that you bring that up because that segues into this perfectly. So we're talking about truth and propaganda and stuff, and I'm kind of saying like, hey, Reddit is a Skinner box. And we'll have a whole video coming out about what that is, and we'll get into that later.
Yes,
but
we do.
It rewards you for saying what they want you to say, right? And also, there are people on there that are astroturfing things. So, kicking it over to you, what is the situation with, for example, the Epstein Island? How does that have anything to do with this kind of truth versus propaganda? And what I mean by that is what you're told about that and what 90% of humans would say is different, right? So, tell me about why.
That's a rich subject, honestly. So here's I'll just briefly overview. Epstein Island was I'll just try to briefly overview. You got Epstein Island, right? A bunch of this guy's Jeffrey Epstein, horrific sex trafficker, terrible human being, would basically go and recruit rich and famous people, influential, powerful people, and bring them to this island where he said, hey, we're going to have a party. There's going to be girls. There's going to be drugs. And it's over. It's on an island. Nobody's going to know you went there. And, of course, the whole time he's keeping literal logs, flight logs of who's joining these parties on this island, who knows what happens on this island? Nothing good. I mean, Epstein was a known sex trafficker, so you probably got underage girls and just horrible things going on in this island that you don't even want to talk about. But basically, what was the purpose of this? Well, Epstein. How much do I even say about this?
I think let me just back up. The reason I ask you that is because the end result, like, how did Epstein become going from alive to not alive? And what does the average person think about that? And what does the media say consistently to this day say about it?
Well, yeah. So I just want to make sure that there's like a truth layer that we're all operating on. So there was that. I won't get into the motives. Maybe we will when we're braver, we're like a bigger channel, but we'll leave it there for now. But basically, you should know that there is a truth layer here that you should just look up on your own. The information is easy to find. Now that what was said, of course, actually, maybe you'll have to say that. I don't really know what was said. I know that the narrative, of course, is that Epstein was a sex trafficker and just a bad guy and probably just offed himself in prison. I know that that's what people say, but I honestly couldn't tell you what is the why behind that, and from the propaganda perspective, I don't know.
Okay, I'll give it to you this way. I'm going to say, let's say I'm just Joe Schmo, regular guy. I work my 40 hours a week as a bricklayer doing God's honest work. Yeah. And I come home and I turn on CNN and I'm like, I want to see both sides. I'll turn on Fox News for a little bit and CNN. What I'm getting from both sides is, and then you ask me, hey, what's going on with this Epstein character? He just went from being alive to not alive. And I'm using that verbiage because it's YouTube, so I don't want to say what happened, but yeah. So basically, I'm going to tell you as Joe Schmo, oh yeah, I saw that on the news over there, and it looks like Epstein kind of committed, he looks like he committed Sudoku, looks like, in jail. Mm-hmm. I guess they're saying both cameras failed. Both security guards were, I guess, asleep, and it looks like he hung himself with a belt. So he was probably depressed about going to jail and doing all this and that and the other. Mm-hmm. That's what I just said to you because that's what the media told me, right? And that's what 90% or that's what 100% of the media was saying at the time, apart from the people who are not beholden to the big donors, etc. So you got the Tuckers and like the individual journalists and stuff. They're telling you what you and I and common sense will tell you, but. Kicking that over to you, that's what let's say I'm Joe Schmo telling you that. What do you say? I'm not even going to set you up this. He was murdered, right? So it's like, we all know he was murdered.
Yes.
But why is it that the government is, and we don't have to talk about Epstein in particular, but like this is an example of the government and the media saying, hey, here's this big thing that, this is our version of what happened. And then 90% of humans will tell you, well, he was murdered.
Right.
Hey, that's a man. Hey, that's a woman. Hey, he was murdered.
Let him in the bathroom.
You just get a gut reaction.
Oh, sorry. It's
exactly.
But yeah.
Exactly. So kicking that over to you in good faith, without kind of this and not in an unexpected way now, with that context. Why is it that there's so many things that the government will say like, "Hey, this is what happened," and then 90% of people will say, "Well, that didn't happen like that. This is what I think happened." And why are those people demonized with like the word conspiracy theorists?
Absolutely. Well, it's about how consent is manufactured, right? So the government gives you, and here's the thing, a lot of times they even know that they're telling you something that is complete bullshit, and that you will know that. They know that you know that what they're telling you isn't the truth, but they're going to tell you anyway, because the point is, here's the bullshit, and we're never going to say anything else about it ever again. Here's a lie, you live with it, it's no longer my problem, it's on you now, and I'm going to wash my hands of it. And they know that the media and that the people who consume the media, the people who are on Reddit, are going to gobble up that lie. There's going to be a certain percentage of the people that just believe everything that they're told. They're going to gobble it up, and they're going to become the majority, because that's the simple, easy narrative. Oh, I wonder what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. Let me Google it. Let me hop on Google real quick. Yeah, enable cookies, please do. Yeah, get those on there. Okay, let's see. We got... according to CNN, he just he offed himself in prison. Jeez. Well, he must have been really depressed. He must have been. I get it though, because hey, you're going to prison for a long time. He was not a good person. So anyway, what's for dinner, honey? Right? And they go on with their lives. And now the next day they're at work and they're talking with Peter, who's a little red pilled and he's hiding his power level a little bit. And then Epstein comes up, and Peter's like, well, he obviously didn't kill himself. And then Joe's here's like, well, yes, he did. I read that yesterday on the news, and the news would never lie to me. He said, no, he didn't kill himself. He was murdered. He was murdered because he was a part of a blackmail operation, and the people in power needed to shut him up, and they didn't want him speaking and going to trial and all this evidence. Well, let me stop you right there, buddy. Blackmail? What are you, some kind of conspiracy theorist? Well, this is all just ridiculous to me. You sound like Alex Jones. I'm cutting this
Right.
off. I don't want to hear this anymore.
Right.
And that's
Right.
how it goes. And now Peter won't talk about that subject anymore
And
because
you
he
get
doesn't want to be
debanked,
fired.
deplatformed, de-et-cetera'd for just saying
Exactly.
what you think is true.
Exactly. So the power, it reinforces itself at every level. And this is what the government needs and the media needs is they need obedient lemmings who are just going to swallow the narrative, and the work takes care of itself. I mean, these
Right.
people work for the government and the media for free, as we said last time. They work for free.
And I want to tie in what how you're because you're talking about manufacturing consent right now, and I want to tie that into something that I think is an important concept, and that is called the not test. So basically, the government does this a lot, and people do this in everyday life as well. They'll make a claim that doesn't pass the not test, just so that they can have some type of ground for statement in an argument to move forward. So what is the not test? The not test is what you do is you take a claim, you take the negation of that claim, and you ask yourself, would anybody in good faith disagree with the negation of this claim? So let me give you an example. So the not test would be something like, hey, we must take action against Iran because we need to protect our national security. So the negation of that would say, hey, we should not take action against Iran and instead endanger our national security. So would anybody on earth agree with the negation?
Oh, of course not. No.
Of course not, right? So that claim does not pass the not test. However, it is used as a way to kind of say, oh yeah, this, so much this, because it's agreeable. It's so agreeable that everyone is going to agree with it, and it's going to make you sound smart and make you sound profound, and you can go on and therefore use any justification to manufacture consent. And the example I gave is exactly what was told to us, in recent events. But it was told this has happened many times by the government, where they give you a claim in my mind that doesn't pass the not test, and then they go talk further. But in real life, when somebody tells me something that doesn't pass the not test, I just say, hey, I call it a truism. I just say, hey, that's just like a truism. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay. The sky is blue. Yeah, I agree with you. 1 +1 is 2.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to disagree that 1 +1 is not 2, right?
Right.
So it's like,
Right.
why did you say that? And that's why I have limited, like, I've kind of, in some ways, a lot of my peers don't even like to give their opinions to me because they know I'm going to, and I'm not doing it to be an asshole. I'm just doing it because that's how I operate. I will actually apply the not test, and I'll actually question them. And it's to a point where if I say something like, what do you mean by that? Just that alone, they'll say, good point. Instead of going down the explanation, they'll just say good point because they've already know that they don't know what they mean by that. So it's such a point where I need to refrain myself from even saying that. I can even make a face. They say, hey, this, that, and the other. Putin is so evil, and I'll just say, and they'll say good point. That's it. That's all I have to do now.
Just the eyebrow. Yeah.
So it's like, kicking it over to you, like, what do you think about the not test, and where have you been able to kind of identify where that's applied as far as manufacturing consent or other aspects of life?
That's awesome. Yeah. You often introduce me to these new subjects. Like last week, it was the via negativa, which I loved, and the not test is phenomenal. I think that I had never heard of it in those terms before, but I definitely do it subconsciously, right? And I think maybe another way to put it, just to echo you, is like what you're really doing is you're treating everybody in the world, and especially people in power, as rational actors. So I mean, we've spent the last hour like really railing against like the government, but one thing that we haven't said and that we wouldn't say is that they're irrational. They're not irrational. They're very rational. Like they have a perspective and a point of view. They want to maintain their power, and everything they do is connected to that. So they're rational actors, but that leads them to lie to you. Their rationalism leads them to do that. So what you're doing is you're saying to yourself, when you hear, let's say, for example, we must defend Ukraine because we have to preserve democracy. Okay, is there anybody especially in the Western countries, that's going to say we should not preserve Ukraine because democracy is bad? Is there anybody that's going to say
example.
that? Right.
Perfect example of the not.
Nobody would say that. So right off the bat,
not even us. We won't even.
You
say
can
that.
see. Right. You can see how thin and how stupid that justification really is. Like, that can't be the real thing. Like, if it's a legitimate point of view, then there must also be a legitimate counter view to it. Otherwise, you can tell it's been made up, right? I think that's and so I'll try to put that into practice. So if, let's say, you hear from Putin, right? Let's apply the not test to Putin's perspective here. Putin says, I don't like NATO on my border because they make me feel unsafe, and I feel like they're threatening my people. Okay, the not test to that is, well, we're not threatening your people. Okay, both of those are perfectly legitimate. Both of those are very understandable points of view. So right away, you can understand that Putin is giving a legitimate opinion, right? Whether he personally really believes it or not is different, but at least what he's saying is something that is you can take
passes
it
the not test.
And yes, and you can react to it and you can deal with it because there's a substance to it, right?
Because of the negation of the claim is actually controversial, right?
Right.
So it's like oh, all the natural numbers in the world added up equals 1/12. That actually is controversial, right? It's like we can talk about that, right?
There's a good video on that. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. But 1 + 1 is 2 is does not pass the not test because 1 + 1 is not 2 is not controversial. So that's one thing to look out for if you want to arm yourself, equip yourself to be armed and dangerous in the world of modernity, etc. Yeah. One of your liberal friends or one of your feminine friends tells you, hey, this company should be, you need to be like implementing more layers of DEI because like you need a bigger diversity of thought, whatever. They give you some of that nonsense that they heard from the news.
Yeah.
Ask yourself first, does that claim pass the not test? If it does, engage with it. If it doesn't, point that out. Say, hey, I don't think that claim really needs to be discussed because no one's disagreeing with the negation of it. And you don't have to frame it like that. You could just put your own spin on it. But that's kind of why I brought that up. And I do believe it ties pretty well into manufacturing consent, right? It presents war as the only reasonable option. It makes the opposition seem irrational or unpatriotic. It manufactures consent by making people feel that questioning war is equal to supporting insecurity. So just kicking it over to you, if you had ever said to somebody like, hey, I don't agree with the fact that we're invading Afghanistan or for Iraq as well for weapons of mass destruction. At that time, I know we were pretty young at that time, but at that time, were you considered unpatriotic by even saying what you would consider to be just a true claim?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're a terrorist sympathizer. You're not patriotic. You don't love this country. You hate the victims of 9/11, right? Any number of just ridiculous claims that can be applied to you. I mean, even like what we were saying at the beginning. Everything we said about the Ukraine thing is going to get us labeled as Putin shills, right? As if you and I have anything to gain from supporting Putin. Again, he's on the other side of the world. I don't give a crap who the president of Russia is. If anything, I want them to have a good, peaceful president so that the world can be safe and prosperous. But that doesn't really affect me at all. But yeah, I mean, if people who don't apply the not test are always going to be sucked into these stupid narratives. You know what it is? It's the same reason that people equate, like the only liberal analogy that they have is Voldemort, right? Or Star Wars. Every bad person, every person they don't like is either Darth Vader or Voldemort, right? And they're the resistance. They're the people fighting. You know why this is? Because those stories are fantasies with clearly good characters and clearly evil characters. There's nothing wrong with that from a story perspective. It's fun, right? Feels good. But it's not how real life works. Real life human beings are complicated. Everybody has a perspective. And conflicts are not always because one person is evil and one person is good. In fact, that's very, very rarely, if ever, what's actually going on. So people who don't apply the not test are not capable of getting really to the nuance. That's why they have such elementary views on stuff like this. So.
Right. And I think that's kind of perfectly said, and I think this has been a great kind of area to kind of click on for propaganda, news, etc. And if you haven't read that book yet, and I think the guy's name was Edward Herman, I believe, the other author.
Yep. Yes. May God rest his soul. I'm sorry, Edward.
Right. And that was thank you, Siri, for pointing that out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But again, so that book, it is one of my top 5s for books.
That's great.
So you got that in the top 5. Check that out. It's really good. We're not affiliated with that company at all. We're not affiliated with Gnome or I guess Edward or any of the publishers. We just like the book. So check out the book. And it really is something that I read too at a younger age, and I kind of was like, well, hang on a minute. This guy's got this like pretty well explained. Yep. And you will start to question like things that you hear about in school, or like you hear like, hey, this, that, and the other, and you start thinking, is it really an evil? Is it really? Am I evil because I lack melanin? Is that a true thing? And we're that's all I'm gonna say on that. We'll get into that in another episode. But kicking it back over to you, I think. Well, actually, not kicking it over back to you. Segueing into kind of a more cohesive version of propaganda. What can you as an individual do to avoid that? I think we'll wrap up propaganda here, but like with this thing, right? How do you arm yourself to not be swayed by this BS?
Yeah. Well, Yeah, in summary, I would say the nod test is wonderful. You should implement that in your life if you're not doing it already. But I think when you arm yourself with a deeper foundation of knowledge, so like you and I were talking about manufacturing consent. When we read those books, what it did is it instilled in us like a sort of natural skepticism of truth, not of truth, but of power and who's controlling the truth. So I'd say the number one thing is understand that everybody has a perspective, even Tony and I, and even yourself, whoever's watching. We have a perspective and we're trying to sell it to you. Tony and I are honest about it. We have an opinion. We're trying to tell you what our opinion is, and we want you to believe us. Whether you do or don't, it doesn't really matter to us. I mean, we're not going to change our views unless you can come on here and really convince us some way, but whatever. But anyway, everybody has an opinion, and everybody has a well-justified reason for their opinion. The justification might be stupid, but they have it. It exists. And you have to respect that. When you talk to other people, when you listen to what they're saying, really listen to it. Is it actually a house of cards? Just because you disagree with it, is it actually stupid? Or is it just something you happen to disagree with? I can argue with a liberal who might say, hey, like I said, the second layer of propaganda, they might come at me with, hey, we need to antagonize Russia because we want to keep them weak so that we can remain powerful in that sphere of influence. I can respect that opinion. I don't agree with you. But that is a well-justified opinion, and one that I'd be happy to debate on the merits of actually doing that. But if they come at me with, we have to defeat the evil overlord Voldemort Putin, then I'm going to say, you live in a Disney movie. You don't think that your whole ideology is built on a house of cards. So apply those kinds of tests, and you'll instantly see how thin people's viewpoints really are. And I think that's the number one way you can sort of bolster your own.
Okay. No, I agree with that 100%. I think that's a great way to go for it. I do want to kind of combine a couple topics here. Power, success, the real world, as well as, masculinity, power. How does that all tie in, right? So
Sure.
I kind of want to just go a little bit over personal strength. And what do you think about personal strength? So I think that to kind of tie back into the top of the episode, we talked about Zelensky, and we talked about the clip, right? Where the clip farming and how might equals right. To circle back to that, might equals right in that room, but also in the world, right? Like that's a whole situation where it's not just confined to or it's not just a broader thing of might versus right in general. Like, United States, you said United States is a more powerful country, and therefore Zelensky is beholden to, has to beg for the gibs.
Right.
But even in the context of if two men are in a room and one is bigger, literally, the man that is bigger is in charge. They may have benevolence and say, hey, like, I want your feedback on something, but at the end of the day, they are the ones that would be having the decisions be made, right? And this is obviously a hypothetical, but what I mean by that is physical strength is not something that is metaphorical. It's literally it's a thing that it matters. It influences life. Whether it's morally okay or pragmatically the case, two different things, right? Mm-hmm. And we haven't even gotten into the morality of it because it's such a thing that almost doesn't matter for the scope of this conversation, but it's important in its own regard. But pragmatically speaking, at the end of the day, it's the same result, right? So building up your physical strength, we always talk about 1 + 2 = 3. And that is, build up your fitness, build up your career, and then you'll get, then you can have time to build up your romance life. So I think to build up your physical fitness, there's a reason we start that off as the first thing, right? Because everything follows from there. Because might equals right, pragmatically speaking, I think, no, spoilers, do you agree that might equals, I guess you do, yeah. So because might equals right,
yes, yeah.
Pragmatically speaking, because might equals right, building up your fitness will lead to you having the ability to be in control of most of your situations in life, right? So I give you two scenarios here. One, you're 22 years old, you never worked out a day in your life, you've been addicted to League of Legends and Roblox for 10 years. Yeah. Your mom says, hey, can you go to the post office and pick up the package that's for me? I got my medicine there. They said that's there. It's for my my heartburn medicine, whatever. Yeah. And you say, oh no, as a man, I've got to help my mom out. Like, let me go. Yeah, I'll go do that for her. So you get in an Uber because you can't drive. Obviously, you don't have a license. Yeah. You go to the post office and there's a fight that breaks out, and you don't know what to do, right? Like, yeah, this situation could literally cause negative effects for your mom. You could exit the scenario, run away, which arguably you should do in some cases, but you could exit the scenario, run away, and then your mom doesn't have her meds, and you go back home. You take another Uber, get home. You're halfway home with walking. You say, I'll just take another Uber. You get home and you say, hey mom, I couldn't get the meds because there was a fight that broke out, and I'm sorry, I just couldn't do it. And she gives you a hug and she says, I love you. It's okay. I'll forgive you. And that's her job. But take that person. Take number two. You're 22, 23 years old. You've trained jiu-jitsu for 2 years. You've hit the gym consistently for 2 years. You drive to the post office to pick up the meds for your mom. Gentlemen, arguably a fight won't break out in that situation, arguably, right? Because people can sense might equals right. So you walk into the room, your neck is bigger, your traps are bigger. People notice this stuff. They're not going to just be chimping out easily. When I see a guy who's 6'8", Brian Shaw style, I feel less allowed to chimp out. I'm not allowed to. If it's just me and just if I'm in a room by myself, I can chimp out as much as I want because I'm not afraid of the consequences, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the two hypotheticals I'm pointing out, and the reason they're so absurd is to get you to understand this. You need to actionably gain abilities and physical strength so that you can but so that control will be given to you in certain situations to reduce your chances of having bad situations occur. So over to you. Yeah. You're a big guy. You hit the gym a lot. What do you think about pre-Dean in a fitness arc versus Dean now who's in that journey as far as having the confidence to be able to maybe resolve a conflict if need be in a situation, a social situation or what have you? Yeah. And contrast to 16-year-old Dean who doesn't really know much about the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you made a great point. Basically, strength is what imposes order on the world. This is true in the Christian worldview. We see God as the Almighty. So he is the strongest being in the universe. Well, he's not a being, but anyway, God is Almighty, and God controls everything. And there is a hierarchy that the universe is designed by God. And basically, the reason that we have order, the reason that we have society, is because there is an underlying strength. And as a man, your job is to mimic that, is to reflect that, basically. You are one of the little nodes in the power structure. And in order to maintain the order around you, you need to be strong enough to enforce that order. Otherwise, chaos seeps in. And it seeps in because you're not there to stop it. So to underscore what you said, basically as men, that's your job. You need to be able to resolve conflicts. You need to be brave enough to face them. You need to be smart enough to understand when it's a conflict that needs resolution in, let's say, a diplomatic way versus a by force way. And you need to be capable of enforcing either one, right? So naturally, if you're not physically fit, the ability for you to at least threaten the sort of physical action that needs to be there actually also undercuts your ability to talk your way out of it, right? So if people don't see you as a physical threat, then they're not going to be afraid to just take what they want from you. And that means you're going to have to fight whether you like it or not. Whereas if you're strong and you look strong and you have, let's say you're armed or whatever the case is, people are going to think twice and they may test you, but then they're much more likely for you to be able to say, hey, you don't want to go there, buddy. Like, look, I'm armed. If you want to take it there, I'm ready to go. They're more likely to de-escalate in that type of situation. So you see how strength actually leads to peace, which is, I think, ties into the original point of the episode, right? Why does might make right? Well, here would be the argument for why the answer is yes. Because through might, we can enforce good things. We can enforce peace. We can enforce prosperity and hold people accountable for when they do bad things. Without might, we can't do those things, right? So, that's I guess that's how I would put that.
And I like what you said specifically when you said the thing that when you touched on might equals right, and just now in your hypothetical when you said you need to be able to have just the ability to enforce threaten violence, just that ability to threaten violence, just the thought in your head, right? And you said armed, etc. And again, if you're not able to physically defend yourself, then that's an option for you. I mean, that's why I made this joke before, but God made men and Colt made men equal. So you have that option available for you, and I think that this is something that kind of ties into training yourself to be able to handle situations. Because I think if you, as you pointed out, if you're actually in a position to use violence if needed, violence is less likely to happen to you, right? And this actually strengthens their argument. And when I say their, I mean going back to the liberal argument of, if we just impose our physical might onto Russia, then the whole world is going to understand that no one can do this stuff around us, etc. And again, they're fed that talking point from Lockheed Martin, right? Then they're
Right.
injected into it, et cetera. But
Yeah.
I'm curious to see, because for me, I always thought, okay, I'm having a son soon. I'm always thinking, like, what am I going to propagandize him to like what sport, right? Is it going to be jujitsu? Is it going to be rock climbing? Is it going to be, parkour? What is it going to be? And I'm leaning towards jujitsu because this is something that I always hear people say in jujitsu community is like, they are literally in physical controlled situations, and they train you in jujitsu to detain somebody. And that's why earlier when I couldn't think of the word that you used that I like, it just now popped back into my head. De-escalate. The way you said de-escalate, it made me think, okay, it is true that the strongest people can de-escalate the situation, right? Strongest physically, strongest with arms, etc., what have you. But that person, just because he is strong, does not mean he will de-escalate. So it takes a good person, morally speaking, and this is where we get into the question, to be both able to and is willing to and is going to use peace as a de-escalating tactic with a threat of violence.
Right.
So what I mean by that is this. I have been detained by police officers before, for this, that, and the other. But the good ones will always, the strongest police officers, they will very calm and say, hey, you are detained and we're going to get this figured out, and et cetera, but don't worry, everything's fine. They're calm. They're calm because they know. And I'm calm too. I'm not going to escalate. I have no cards. I'm not Zelensky. I'm not going to say, well, this, that, and the other. I'm just going to, I'm actually going to use my Fifth Amendment right and say, it's all good. I'm detained. Yep. And that kind of mutual understanding, he's in control. He has dominion over me. For that 10 seconds, 10 minutes, whatever, I'm not going to pretend that he's not in control of that situation. He's armed. Right. I'm not armed. If I was armed, I'm not allowed to use my arms against him because he has qualified immunity, whatever. So I'm just going to accept that he is in control of the situation. And I'm allowing it. I'm going to give agency to him, right? And so that being said, he knows that I recognize that. And this benevolent cop, we'll call it a benevolent cop, he says, hey, I'm going to quickly figure out like what's going on here. There must be some kind of confusion. You did give me a quick anecdote of what happened here. So he just does his due diligence and says, hey, let me look at here and see, okay. And he says, hey, I got the wrong guy. You're free to go. And he apologizes for detaining me. And that's it. It's just a 5-minute, whatever interaction that could have gone from 0 to death immediately if I started, chimping out and saying, hey, I didn't do anything. And if I start raising my hands and escalating, this gentleman here is peaceful. He knows that I know that we both understand the power dynamic, right?
Yes.
So kind of a weird kind of anecdote there, but it's I think it makes sense to tie into here, right? Because if you do know that, if you do know that you're in capable control of situations, there is an understanding and agreement. And I kind of want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you agree without saying it that the other person is in charge?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've also been detained, so I can point to that. Even just when I was younger and I'm smaller and just maybe not. I mean, even today, I don't know that I'd be good at fighting. I haven't been in a fight in a very long time, but I'd be more willing to take it on. But there was a time in my life where I definitely wasn't. So yeah, I mean, I could point to a number of things like that, and I do think this ties in, by the way. So I wanted to sort of steer it a little bit, but what we're describing, what you just described, is a very masculine perspective, right? So
exactly.
So men, I think as men, we sort of instinctively understand that this is the way the world works. Right? I mean, when you're a kid, you're a boy. Every boy is wrestling with their friends. Every single one of them. We've all done that, right? And I'm sure girls do it too. But for boys, it's like your favorite thing to do, right? Like I remember wrestling with all my best friends, probably all the way till like middle school. We're all like, we'd get on the trampoline and we'd literally have tournaments. That's what we would do. We'd literally sit there and organize tournaments of like wrestling just with your boys. And it's fun, but it's fun, but there is an unsaid like layer of, we all know who the strongest one is, right? We all know who is holding back. Like when kid A is wrestling kid B and kid A is like one of the big kids and kid B is one of the little kids, everybody knows that kid A is not going full force, right? Because if he did, he would hurt the little one. And even kid B knows that. I think, I'll be honest with you, I was always the big kid, but I presume that the little kid always knows that too. Yeah, but and again, it's not even like as the big kid, I'm looking down on kid B. Like I'm holding back because I don't want to hurt him. He's my friend, but I do enjoy wrestling with him. And a lot of times he'll pull out some move because he's not as strong as me, so he needs to get creative, right? And he'll surprise me, and I actually enjoy that. I enjoy when he comes up with something new, and then I have to combat that, right? So anyway, the point is that as men, you have this instinctive understanding. It's born in you as a little boy. You start to develop this understanding of hierarchies in the world, And then ideally, by the time you get into adulthood, you're positioned to start accepting these, like the example you gave, where, hey, if I get detained, I know I'm the little kid right now. I'm the little kid in this wrestling, and this guy's holding back. I know he's holding back, and I'm glad he is, because I don't want to get hurt. I'm the little kid here, so I'm going to respect that, and I'm grateful to him for holding back. Thank you, and I will in turn be respectful. And you see how this builds up a stable and peaceful interaction where we can just sort of resolve whatever it was that went wrong. Okay, so how does this connect to? This also connects to the previous subject we were talking about, which is like propaganda. Okay, so this type of like masculine understanding is being carved out of our society, right? Boys and men are basically attacked from a young age and told that being masculine is toxic, that there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. And what I always understood that to mean is that there's a way to be too masculine. And if you're too masculine, then that's actually bad, which implies that there's some happy medium, and it just happens to be wherever the feminists, want you, right? But that's what happens is traditional masculinity gets stripped away, but then everything that Tony and I just explained about like stable and peaceful and mutually understanding interactions between two people with varying levels of power also gets cut out. So just as I said earlier, where in order to enforce peace, there needs to be an underlying threat of like strength and violence. Well, you've taken away the underlying threat because it made feminists uncomfortable, right? But now, because the underlying threat of violence is gone, so is the peace. Now the world is more chaotic. Now right. People can get away with stuff because men are afraid to act masculine, right?
So no, exactly. That's perfectly well. I would call that a weave, and I think you got that from Trump, and it was a good weave. And I think it was perfectly well weaved, because that actually is something I wasn't even thinking about, and you segued it right into a perfectly weaved situation. And I think I would say masculinity is under attack is not even a controversial claim. That's just people. That's a fact, right? Yeah. And it even goes back to what you're talking about. Age 5, 6, 7, you're wrestling with the boys, and maybe 10, 11, 12, you're wrestling with the boys, and you got the one guy that's like a little bit too sensitive, and you just don't allow him back in the group. You just say, hey, you're not playing with us. We don't want you involved, because you're going to be involving adults and saying, hey, he hurt me. Meh. Right. You consented to it. I mean, get out of the group. And again, so one thing about that anecdote, and I'll give my own little anecdote too about that in a second, but there is a hierarchy even at that level, right? We're just biologically trained to know that there's a hierarchy. And that is the strongest person is going to ruin this for all of us if he goes full force, right? It's not fun. So what's fun, though, for that strong person to be humbled by somebody stronger in a different external situation, right? So even using you as an example, maybe if you're in 5th grade and you're wrestling the boys, if an 8th grader was wrestling you, you'd be humbled and say, hey, I've got growth. I could grow, Absolutely. And going back to that, we live in a post-wartime modernity where it doesn't even have to be physical. You can even be playing GoldenEye, and the best GoldenEye player on your street was always you. Obviously, everyone is the best GoldenEye player on the street. That's like
of course, whoever you ask.
It's like the Mandela effect.
Yeah.
It's like the GoldenEye effect, right?
Yeah.
But Super Smash Brothers Melee, you're playing that as a kid, and you got that one guy on your street that's so good that you don't even want to play with him because he's gonna make it not fun for everybody. But you play with him anyway, and that guy knows that. He knows that he's so much better than everybody that he has to play worse or play in a different character, play more to allow more fun, right? Because in that context of modernity, might equals right is translated to skill equals, I guess, will, if you will. I don't know, but it's in that case, it just translates to things that aren't just physical strength. And I'll use one more example. If you're on Wall Street and you have 10 people that are investing, the best investor is kind of known as, hey, I'm the best top dog here, and everybody else can kind of I can give advice here and there and this, that, and the other, but there's even alphas in the room when it doesn't even come to physical might. It comes to expertise at that situation. But at the end of the day, if there is a war that breaks out, or if there's a violent situation that breaks out, physical strength and the ability to impose that physical strength is going to be the number one preferred trait at that time, right? So that's why post modernity, it doesn't have to be wrestling. It doesn't have to be arming yourself with the Colt. It could be something else. And ties into society and ties into modernity because there's an attack on masculinity, and people are being told, "Hey, if you're actually a little bit feminine, women will like you more."
Right.
Let's ask that question. Does that pass the not test? I mean,
Do women, are the feminine attracted to other feminine, right? Like, it's funny because in a subtle way, yes, right?
of course it
But
does, right? It passes
right.
the not test because it's not
Yeah.
true. It's a controversial.
Yeah.
It itself is a controversial claim. It's so
Right.
ridiculous on its face that it's saying, "Hey, we need to tell men to not be masculine," and say, "Hey, women are actually attracted to people who talk about their feelings more, or write journals about The Notebook, the movie, or go see Brokeback Mountain at midnight when it drops and talk about how much they love it."
And share your trauma. Yeah.
Right.
Women love that.
So
Women can't wait to hear
women love
about,
that.
your sad stories. Oh, they love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a way that's a tactic that people are using to attack masculinity by saying, "Oh, this is actually what women want."
Yep.
Women themselves, if push comes to shove, will admit to you, no, they don't want that.
Right.
They want a strong, capable, secure man because they don't want to be ever in a situation where they have to think, "Am I going to be the one that has to impose violence here to solve the situation?" Because in 90% of situations that they're in, they can't. They're not the strongest person in the room, so they can't do that. So they need help.
Yes.
And again, so this is something that people use as a tactic to say, "Hey, let's shut down masculinity at its peak." Even at age 11, they're saying, "Hey, don't wrestle.
Right.
Hey, don't stop horse playing. Stop
Rough
horse playing
housing.
is something that you're
Horseplay.
trained
Yeah.
You're trained to just ignore that in a good way.
Yeah.
You should be.
Yeah.
When I was 11 years old and somebody said, "Stop horse playing," I just kept horse playing because that's what that means.
Yeah, of course.
Stop horse playing means
you
keep
wait till they're
horseplaying.
not looking and you start again. Yeah.
So kicking it over to you, like, how is even that small claim of stop horse playing kind of ruining society? I know it sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but
Well, it does sound ridiculous, but it isn't. Everything is everything. Man. Things can't just happen in a broad, sweeping motion. Like the feminists couldn't just come out in the 20s or whatever and say, "Hey, no more masculinity because we want women to be equal, to have to take power in society, and we want to destroy the family because of that, and we want to make sure men are not allowed to be men, and we want to make it impossible to date because we're going to fill these men with these stupid ideas about how to talk to women and how bad masculinity." None of these things can be said because they're not even thinking about it. It's all a slow buildup. Like, no roughhousing, no horseplay. Like you said, it's almost like a rite of passage. Like, I think even as a parent, you must know that I'm telling you not to do this, but I know you're going to do it. Like, surely you must, if you're sensible, if you have any brain in your head whatsoever, you must understand that when you tell your child not to do something, there's a very good chance they're just going to go do it anyway. Especially if they're having fun. Like, if it's something that they're clearly enjoying, they're going to go back and do it. So it's almost like a rite of passage. Like, hey, I'm the parent and I'm technically supposed to forbid this, so just don't do it. But then the kid's like, "Sure thing, Dad, I got you." And then they're going to go around the corner and start doing it again. And it's like, the kid knows that they're rebelling, and the parent knows, like, yeah, he's probably ignoring me, and he's going to come back running with a bloody nose or whatever. But whatever, I'm just going to have to live with that. But it's just part of growing up. It's a natural thing that we all go through, and you can't attack it. You can't eliminate it. It'll never be eliminated, and nor should it be. It's just the way boys learn to interact with the world. And it leads to everything else, like you brought up, like, do women respect, like, strength, or do they even want masculinity when it comes to dating, right? Of course they do. Of course they do. It's just like asking, does a man want femininity? Like, of course they do. What do you mean? Like, why would we not? It's a polarity, right? Think of the yin and the yang. Like, there's a masculine and there's a feminine, and the relationship works because there are two sides joining together. That's what makes it lovely and beautiful. That's the spiritual component of this. Of course they need masculinity, and of course men need femininity. And I believe that the stronger the polarity in the relationship, the better it is, because a woman cannot fully embody masculinity ever, no matter what. I mean, she can put on a mask, she can try her best, but it's never going to be completely there. And just the same way a man cannot fully embody femininity. Again, put on a mask, put on a dress, put on the lipstick, walk into the bathroom, but it's never really the same thing, right? So you need a man to be fully masculine and a woman to be fully feminine. That's how these things fit together. And that's what's under attack. And I think it's really sad. I think it's a main driver of the loneliness epidemic, which we've talked many times. But hopefully this conversation was illustrative to you, because we talked about might equals right, and we talked about propaganda, and now I think it's clear how those both weave into even something as seemingly disconnected as dating. Right? It's still there. It's the same thing that's going on. There's a propaganda feeding you a certain narrative, and it just happens to be connected. Yeah, the fact that you're struggling on dating apps is directly related to the fact that we're sending billions of dollars of money to Ukraine. Yes, in fact, they are directly related. Like it sounds crazy to you, but hopefully we've explained a little bit about why that is.
Well, no, and I think it's perfectly said, because there is a loneliness epidemic, and a lot of it is caused by people listening to things they shouldn't be listening to, in my opinion, right? Things that you and I just shut out immediately when somebody, for example, as something as benign as stop horseplaying. Yeah, and you pointed out correctly. You said there's a rite of passage. You do have to kind of say this, that, and the other. And I'm going to give two anecdotes. One is I have two nieces, and one of them, well, my brother was over, who was the father of of my nieces, and he asked, hey, like, what did she, who did that? Because one of them did something wrong, and immediately the older one was like, no, she did it, and I as the uncle, because he's not allowed to do this, as the uncle had to teach her, hey, let's practice something. Ready? I'm going to ask you who did that, and you're going to say, I don't know. Ready? Hey, who did that? And she said, I don't know. And I'm like, perfect, let's try again. And so I kind of taught her, and a lot of parents are out there screaming at me, but as the uncle, it's my job to teach her this, because her parents can't.
Yeah.
It's that you have a code of silence, and to a certain extent, if your little sister or little brother did something, or older brother did something wrong or whatever, and that your parents disagree with, let them handle it their way. Let the older brother confess to that if they choose to. Don't choose to rat them out, because one day, hey, you're going to do something that your parents don't want you to do, and you need your older brother to back you up in that case too. There's a code of silence for a reason, right? And the second anecdote I'll give related to that is when I was growing up, I had two older brothers, right? So I learned that might equals right. I think at age 4 or 5, I learned that pretty early, because there is always that unspoken. My oldest brother is the hierarchy. There's a hierarchy, right? When we drive to the grocery store, who gets to sit in the front seat? If my oldest brother's there, if number 1 is there, he gets to. If he's not there, number 2 gets to. If he's not there, I get to sit in the front seat. That's how it worked. There's no rotation. There's no egalitarian system. It's just might equals right. Okay?
Exactly.
And that's simply the case. My mother understood that. She didn't want to argue with it. We wrestled each other for it, and it was it. And we didn't wrestle all the time. We just did it a couple times and said, okay, he proved his strength, and that's it. And I wasn't resentful to them because of it. I just knew, hey, this is the case, and I thank them for not imposing violence for unnecessarily, only as needed.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so like you said, once it's resolved, it's resolved. You don't need to keep. There's no rehashing it. It's been done. We know where everybody stands, and that's the way it is. Right. It's more peaceful than the alternative.
Right. And the contrast of that is if we had a system in place for, we got into trouble here and there, not too much, but enough to where the parents would say, hey, what happened? They'd go out, to, maybe they'd be at work or something, and one of us would break a dish, right? And maybe it was me. Well, we had a rotation where somebody would take blame for something, even if they didn't do it. And that we had a system for that, just so that we could kind of space out, hey, maybe if my brother wanted to go to a party this weekend and he broke a dish, I'll take blame for it so that he doesn't get grounded for the party, and I could stay home that weekend, no problem, right? In exchange, he would say, hey, next time you do something stupid, I'll say it was me, and then we'll kind of go from there, as long as we agree on it. But we had a number one rule is if we didn't discuss it, the default answer is I don't know, right? And that works. The code of silence works when you have to really get through and maneuver life, because in this case, might equals right means my stepdad is the ultimate authority, right? And we don't want him to have any excuse to say, hey, let's punish this person or that person. Let's just have a code of silence to make him figure it out himself. Just like the Fifth Amendment, kind of, you're not responsible to prove your guilt to the officer. It's his duty to prove that you're guilty, right?
Right.
So you're not going to do his job for him. Just like that, as kids at a young age, we figured that out. We're not going to do that for him. Hey, you got to figure that out yourself. So we all agreed, hey, I don't know. Hey, who broke that dish? I'm not sure. I don't know. And so, is that a lie? Is that morally wrong? Arguably. Is it something that's a little fun and kind of makes sense from a utilitarian perspective? Yeah, of course it does.
Well, again, it's part of becoming a man. Like it's fun. It's fun. You skirt the edge. You find the boundaries. Is what little boys do, especially. They push. They push. They want to know where is the boundary, and that's the father's role in the home, is to set it. Hey, you can push. Go ahead. I know you're going to do it, But there's a point you're going to come to where I will not let you go any further, and I'm going to put my foot down, and you're going to run into the wall, right? And then
Right.
as a boy, then you found out, okay, hey, that's where it is. I won't go there again, right? It's just like this is
Right.
a very masculine way to live life, and I think that's extends very very nicely to what we're saying with like just politics. I mean, this is how these things have to be sorted out. It has to be in a masculine way. The reason we live in a peaceful world is because it's masculine, because the people in control have these masculine impulses. If it wasn't for that, it would be chaos.
Right.
Like that's what I hope the feminists can eventually understand, is like by trying to debase and demonize masculinity, you're making the world more dangerous. You're literally ruining this setup that has allowed you to have the rights and the privileges that you have. You're just stripping that away.
So to double click on masculinity, I was going to ask you this: Is it is the answer I don't know kind of the most masculine thing you can do in a situation where you really don't want to get somebody in trouble, or you really don't think it's your place to go in to get involved in some area of a conversation?
I think definitely, yeah, because I think what you're doing in that situation is you're acknowledging the hierarchy and your place in it too, right? Because you have to take care of yourself, and sometimes taking care of yourself means protecting others who are maybe below you, and they may not be below you in terms of like, hey, we wrestled and so this person therefore is like, my slave, nothing like that. But let's say in a situation where your little brother does something that's going to get them in trouble. Well, you're their big brother, and your role is to sort of be there for them and to look out for them, even in a situation where the quote unquote opposition is like your dad, right? Like your little brother has to know that, hey, I got your back here. Like I may not lie on your behalf, but I'm definitely not going to make it worse for you, right? Like
Right.
I'm not going to push you further down. So maybe the most responsible thing to do would be to go to the little brother and say, hey, you need to talk to dad about this. You did something wrong. I'm not going to get in the middle of it, but you know, he's going to ask me, and
See,
I'm just going to have to say I don't know. He's
exactly.
going to figure out eventually. So
See, that is
it's like
exactly what
that.
I wanted you to say because it's exactly the case. To me,
Hmm.
it's not my job, it's not my position to tell someone else about someone else's thing. It's their
Right.
job. I would
Right.
encourage them to tell the truth, and they would eventually do the manly thing, and the masculine thing is to, hey, I'm going to own up to this. It was me that broke the dish. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Let's handle it, right? That's masculine,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so the reason I asked this is because another kind of recent situation that happened is a gentleman named Andrew Tate came back from Romania he landed in Florida, I believe,
Right.
to visit he visited the United States for about a month, and a governor of Florida made a claim saying, hey, he was asked in an interview saying, hey, Andrew Tate, he's accused of all these crimes. He's allowed to come back to Florida. What's going on with that? And I believe Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida at the time, he said he chose the non-masculine option, and that is
Yeah.
to capitulate to the pushback and say, well, something of a stance, which he said, hey, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I think he's definitely guilty of these crimes or whatever, and we don't tolerate that stuff. And I'm going to get in touch with the U.S. Attorney General and see if we can basically find crimes to charge him with, right?
Right.
Whereas Trump, the masculine gentleman, he said, I don't know. He was asked the same question by media. He said, I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on with that. We'll have to look into that. I'll
Yep.
get back to you.
Yep.
That is the masculine answer. I don't know what's going on with that situation. I'm going to look into it and get back to you, because the truth of the situation is that he's not. He has a passport. He's not a convicted felon. He's not convicted of any crimes.
Right.
He's not.
Right.
All he's doing is free traveling, right? But Ron
Right.
DeSantis capitulated to the pushback media, the pushback narrative of, oh my goodness, this guy's going to make this area unsafe and this cancel culture, etc.
Right. Right.
So, kicking it
Yeah.
over to you, I bring it up. I laid the bottom up as a kids arguing over things as a children thing, but it happens in real life with adults in high
Yeah.
positions of power every day. So why did Ron DeSantis make that feminine call and say, hey, let's capitulate?
Yeah. I mean, there's a great example. Yeah, the masculine response is I don't know, because you don't know. I mean, that's the simple fact. That's the simple fact of the matter. Like, there's no reason for Ron DeSantis to even have an opinion on that, right? There's no, even if he does have an opinion, there's still no reason to publicly have an opinion on that. You know what I mean? Like even if let's say Ron DeSantis personally somehow knows something about this situation and personally dislikes Andrew Tate, it still doesn't make sense politically for him to come out and say this, right? So then if it doesn't make sense politically, and we also really doubt that he even does know anything about the situation, why did he say this? Okay, it's because he's feeling an illusory pressure from the media, from feminist people, spokespeople, from Democrats, from anybody who hates the messages that Andrew Tate spreads. He's feeling a pressure from them that he's capitulating to, as you said. He's giving into it because he thinks, I want to get reelected. What can I say about this situation that would boost my popularity? And especially among the women. The women don't really like me too much. I'm a Republican, so I kind of struggle with women. So, what can I say? You know what? Let's investigate this guy. I know he's a bad guy. I've heard it. I've heard he's a bad guy. So let's just let's sick the dogs on him. And that'll boost me some points. Nothing to do with what's the truth. Nothing to do with what are the facts of the situation. Nothing to do with what did Andrew Tate do, if anything, that would justify an investigation into him on American soil. Nothing. That doesn't enter into the equation. It's all this like petty, underhanded, I don't know. I wouldn't call it backstabbing because he didn't know any loyalty to him, but it's just cringy. It's fake. Let me get elected type behavior. Right. And to be honest with you, who the most popular politician in the country is right now? His name is Donald Trump. All right. And Donald Trump, if there's one thing everybody can agree on, is that he doesn't lie. He says the truth. He says what's on his mind, right? To a fault. He's going to come out and say exactly what he thinks about a given situation. He's going to just blurt it out, right? And it's funny most of the time. But the fact is, he's saying the truth. And if he doesn't know, that's why it's not even hard. He doesn't have to think about that. When some reporter asks him about Andrew Tate, it's not like in his mind he's calculating, I need to protect Andrew Tate. I need to make sure I don't get in hot water with people who support Andrew Tate. Nothing of that is going on. He simply is hearing a question and immediately saying, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. And then saying that and just saying, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. That's it.
I wouldn't even be surprised if he doesn't really know much about Andrew Tate. I
don't think he does. Yeah, why would he? What does he have to do with Andrew Tate? I mean,
yeah, like somebody like you and I would know the name Aiden Ross. I mean, I kind of barely know that name.
I know,
but like Trump didn't even know who that name was until his son kind of said, "Hey, you should get on this guy's podcast. It'll get you a chance of getting reelected better." Right. So to me, it's like perfectly said how you framed it. Is that Ron DeSantis took the easy way out, or what felt like the easy way out, right?
Yeah.
If I know he doesn't know what transpired or the events that transpired, because if he did know, his answer would, if anybody knew the answer, if anybody knew, and it's all public record to an extent, what it was really going on with Andrew Tate, their answer would be this. It would be, well, he's never been convicted of any crime ever, anywhere, ever. Right. He's not even indicted of a crime. Has a U.S. passport. So if he commits a crime, we'll put him in jail. If he doesn't,
exactly,
we're not going to do anything. That's the answer, right?
Yep.
That's better than I don't know, but I don't know is sufficient. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll look into it.
Yeah.
Because, and I get it, if you want to avoid, because he is a kind of a political, Andrew Tate is one of those kind of fiery, kind of even name dropping him. Like you get, Andrew, we're talking about Andrew Tate.
Exactly.
Talking about Andrew Tate. Let me button up my top button. Andrew Tate. That's the actually comes out. Right? Well, actually, he said this, that, and the other, and actually this.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, okay. So even if his name is dropped, and I get it, if you want to get away from that political mess, you just say something like, I don't know, we'll look into it. But you can hold your tongue, but if you want to give the honest truth of the situation, is that he's never been convicted of a crime. He's not currently a convicted felon. Romania let him go. He's on part of his bail request is that he's allowed to travel freely now. All he has to do is check in once a month to Romania. And he's going to do that. There's so many things that just the headline of the news says Andrew Tate is, and I'm not going to use the words because it's so egregious. That's what they say about him is, human trafficker, whatever. Right. And so, of course, if you're somebody who doesn't know about it and you hear, are the frame question of, are you okay with this human trafficker being like, landing in your state? It's like, whoa. Hold on.
No,
I don't know much about that situation. Let me comment that for now and get back to you.
Yeah. Simple as that. So it's a very masculine thing to do because it's the truth. I think that's the key right there is like, it's masculine to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is you don't know, and that's a matter of humility too, and in Ron DeSantis's case, I don't think it was arrogance that caused him to say what he said. I think it was more just, political, posturing. But, on a human level, it's humble to just say you don't know. And I think that a certain amount of humility is required to be a man. I mean, it goes into what we were saying with is, as a man, you need to respect the hierarchies. They are there. They're part of the world. And to know your place in the hierarchy requires a certain level of humility. I'm not the top guy. I'm not the biggest guy, the strongest guy, the fastest, smartest, whatever the case is. I'll never be that. But I know my place. And if somebody asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, saying I don't know is humble. Yeah, hey, do you know? I don't know. Do you know? Let's find out.
Right.
Tell me.
Let's investigate together.
And if you don't know, exactly. We'll figure it out together. So that's masculine. That's part of what masculinity is to me. So.
Right. And I think being able to understand that even if you do know something, it's not your place to talk about it. That's like layer 2 of it, right?
Right.
And that's kind of where I get into like, okay, this is somebody else's drama. I'm not even going to speak on it because it's not, I do know what's going on there, but I don't know it in a way to frame it how he would frame it. So I'm not going to talk about that. Yes. So that gets into the workplace conversation. It's like, and we'll segue into a little bit here. Like, what is the whole implications of the whole masculinity war and like, how is it affecting the career aspect of things, right? And so it's like, in a job setting, right? This is perfect for in a job setting. If somebody at your work asks you about a non-work related thing, that it could be a hot topic, of course you should say, I don't know. Just say, I don't know. So let me give an example. Let's say you're a software developer or you're let's say you're a writer or whatever, and you're in an office and it's election season. The year is divisible by 4, so there's an election coming up, and everyone's talking about orange man bad or Biden's falling asleep, whatever. It's a risk. It's too much of a risk in that case, in my opinion, to say anything about any of that stuff because the person that's in charge of you can be, and by in charge I mean it's a fake. It's not real. It's really actually it's quite a. There's interesting that dials into it, but it's not really. He's not really in charge of you, but the person who's pretending to be in charge of you and that pays paying you, signing the checks.
Yeah.
Maybe they have an opinion of, hey, I'm part of the Democrat camp, so if you say something that's pro-Trump, I'm going to put that in my brain filing cabinet that you're kind of one of those Trumpers. So I'm going to next time performance reviews come up, I might take that into the equation subconsciously. So to avoid that, what I would always do if somebody brings up politics in the casual, let's say you're in line to get coffee at the office and you're just talking, somebody in front of you says, can you believe what Trump said the other day? Can you believe that? And he looks at you for a response. 2 things you could do. One is, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what his thought process was on that, but what's going on there? Kick it back over to them and let them talk and just nod, right? That's one way. A little bit not masculine, but it's something, right? Number 2 is just say, oh, I didn't hear it. I don't know. I'm not sure. And then walk away. Yep. Never do 3, which is, oh my goodness, what is wrong with you? Trump is this, that, and the other. He's actually right or wrong. Don't ever give that opinion. You're at work. You know what I'm saying? So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. So because this is like the practical advice of like sort of stuff you can take away from this question. So quickly summarizing like how we got here, you have the idea of might makes right. So the people who are in charge are going to have certain privileges that you don't have, but rights, if you will. They'll have rights. And now, twofold thing there. Number 1 is that people who do not have maybe noble interests or intentions will use their might to manipulate you and to steer the world in a certain direction. That's also true. Now, you as just a guy, right? You're just a guy. You're interacting with the world, and you're going to be subject to those pressures. You're going to be pushed on. And as a man in particular, you're going to run into this issue where masculinity is frowned upon, demonized, and you're not supposed to do it. So, that being said, you still need to go to work. You still need to interact with other people. You still need to build social connections. You still got to maintain your family. And all of these things are going to require you to maneuver, if you will, navigate the social situation we find ourselves in. So what you just gave, I think, is a perfect example of something that's going to happen to you all the time. And work is a perfect example because work is the HR culture. It is the place where, basically every approved opinion of society, the way people are supposed to be, is enforced by threat of you're going to be fired or maybe even face a lawsuit if you don't follow along, right? So this is like ground zero. This is like the most important part of where everything is. In your dating life, you may not let's say you succumb to all the pressures. Worst thing is you're just lonely, and that sucks, but that's it. You go your job, you give in to your urges to just say whatever's on your mind. Yeah, you might get fired. You're going to lose your livelihood, right? You're going to lose a lot if you go down that road. So you really need to know how to navigate it peacefully. And I think the number one thing is what Tony just sort of alluded to is sort of like, I would call it like the shadow realm, like the sort of the shadow dynamics of like, I am refusing to put myself out there first. I'm going to need this person to demonstrate to me where they stand, and that way I can go out and meet them at the right place, right? So it's like a negotiation. Okay, so if you go through a job interview and they talk about salary, best thing you can do is not throw out a number first, right? That you may get forced to, but ideally you're not throwing out a number. They are, right? And that lets you know where they stand and how much you can reasonably push for. Okay, the same thing is true in like a corporate office setting if a politics thing comes up. You don't want to just bust out your opinion. Oh, Trump this, Trump that. No matter how you feel, whether you like Trump or don't, you don't want to just come out and say it. You need them to do it first. So saying I don't know, right, is I believe it is masculine, because what you're doing is you're thinking on the next level. You're thinking ahead of them. Like, I know you're going to have some strong opinion. The fact that you even wanted to bring this up to me tells me you've got a strong opinion on it, right? I don't know what it is yet, but I'm going to find out. I'm not going to put my neck out there until I know where yours is, right? And all you got to do is, like Tony said, I don't know. What do you think? What happened? Tell me. They're going to spill their guts, right? Because most people are not thinking on this level. So they're just going to come right out. They can't wait. They can't wait to talk about it. Like, it's clearly on their mind. They want to get it out. So let them get it out. And then, let's say they give you the liberal talking points. They give you the CNN copy pasta. You know what to say. You need to say, wow, I can't believe that. That's crazy. And then you walk away, right? let's say they give you something a little more based, a little more red pilled. Hey, you can choose to engage with that if you want, but you just got to take it as it comes. But it starts off with that starting from a strong position. So think of it as a negotiation. Like the push and the pull. And like I said, I believe that is masculine. It's just a little more of like the shadow realm. Thinking about power dynamics.
Right. And I like that you brought up the negotiation tactic for salary, because that is the exact analogy where, when you enter a room for a salary negotiation, if they ask you, they're always going to ask you this, in my mind, ridiculous question that it's almost like when a police officer does something ridiculous. Like, if they weren't a police officer and everybody was analyzing the situation and they said, excuse me, I'm going to have to disarm you before we have a conversation because for my safety. That's what a cop says, right? They say, I need to disarm you for my safety. It's a little bit of a ridiculous thing if they said that as another citizen. Imagine if a citizen walked up to you and said, hey, if you don't mind putting your weapon on your on your dash, I need to disarm you for my safety. No, thank you, sir. But going into the negotiation tactic, when the employer says, "What is your preferred salary?" and again, ridiculous question, because every human on the world would say, "My preferred salary is $1 million a minute." Like, why would anybody have a number that's lower than infinity per second?
Right.
Yeah,
I don't want to make too much money. I gotta let's see. I prefer to be a little broke. I want to struggle just the right amount.
It's like Peter Griffin. It's like, oh yes, my doctor. He said I was in too good of shape, too healthy. Yes, Lois. Yeah. You didn't go, did you, Peter? No, I did not.
Right.
So it's like negotiation tactic number 102, if you will, is they say, what is your preferred salary, right? And so they say, what is your preferred salary? And you kick it over back to them and say, you always ask this question: what does the job pay? What is the job pay? What is the salary range of the job? So pressure flip it to them exactly in the political situation where you say, I don't really know. What's your thought on that? Don't say I don't know, but it's like you're kicking it back over to them. It's like how I kick over things at Dean, right? A lot of times I kick it over to him because I want to see where he wants to go with something, so that I can match my conclusion to kind of in his kind of range, right? Because I can go off on tangents and go way out in left field, but if he wants to go kind of right field, center field, I'll follow him there. I just need to know kind of where he wants to go with it. That's why I'll say, hey, kick it over to you. How does this whole... So back to the salary thing. If they say, hey, what's your preferred salary? Don't just say, oh, my $20 an hour. Just say, hey, what does the job pay? I'm kind of curious, like, what are we going to do? And then that pressure flips it. And a lot of times they'll say, well, we have a budget and it kind of depends on experience and et cetera, but we go between X and Y, right? And say, okay, well, I made Y plus 4 at my last company, so if you guys can maybe match or compete with that, and they'll tell, the truth is you can do that. So let's say, we can do Y plus X, we can do Y plus 6. Let's get confirmation from my supervisor and see if we can do Y plus 6 and go from there. Now you've got a situation where you've locked them into a number, right?
Yep.
And as you've seen in episode 10, you're vetting them, right? It's not the other way around. So
yes.
This is a constant theme because everything is everything. We're going to relay things back to certain episodes. Moving through life with that vet them strategy, do that for everything. Do that for politics. Do that for everything. So it's just kind of my answer on that. And I like the way you articulated the negotiation aspect and how you brought the salary aspect into it, because that's kind of a common question where people get that wrong a lot.
Yeah, I think it's all understanding the way these power dynamics play out, and your place in it. Like it or not, you're going to have to interact with these things. And in the job interview example, you don't have the power, but you need to pretend like you do, right? And sometimes that happens. It's just like if you're dating a new girl, the best thing you can do is act like you don't care whether she comes or goes, right? Like you got to kind of be like, hey, if you want to fit into my frame, then awesome. But if not, then see you later. And deep down, you're like, God, I hope she likes me. I really like her. She's so pretty and sweet. It'd be so nice if she'd hang out with me more. Like, that's what you're thinking, but you can't let that out.
Yeah.
It's just got to be like, hang out if you want.
She knows it, but she can't confirm it. That's how it has to be, right? Like, this is, I agree with Red Pill. Like, you want her to know it, but not confirm it 100%, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the Red Pill theory of that. Yeah, I agree with it.
You take the power artificially, and it leads to real power, right? It's almost like a fake it till you make it kind of thing. In the interview, you take the power artificially by saying, well, what's your range? What's your guys' budget for this position? Or what does the job typically pay? Something like that. That's you taking the power, because now they're going to be forced to either ignore your question, which is awkward, or just give you the truth, right? Which they may do. And,
the truth, meaning their version of the watered down, but they'll negotiate back and they'll say a lower than what they give you.
Yes, but don't give up the little power you do have is in withholding the truth that you don't have any power, right? You may be unemployed, you may be desperate, like I need this job, but if your only power in that scenario is by not letting them know that you have no power. You see what I'm saying? So
exactly. Yeah. Abundance mentality.
Yes, exactly. So apply that to dating too. Like I said, you may be very lonely, you may really like that girl, but that by admitting that, you're almost guaranteeing you're not going to get her, right? So that's the reality of the situation. You got to withhold it sometimes. So
I guess to summarize, does might equal right? I mean, we talked for 2 hours. I mean, what do you think? Put it in the comments.
Yeah, well, we never directly addressed it, but I think that the contents of our conversation kind of illustrate yes and no. And that's not too satisfying. Maybe it's like a non-answer.
Perfect YouTube 2-hour podcast answer is yes and no, right?
So after 2 hours, we don't know.
Which is masculine to say, right?
It is. Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, well, I'll try to say this to give some substance. It depends on the scale we're talking about. Okay, so in the terms of like between two countries, I think it's clearly yes. I think clearly the stronger country is going to get their way. And if the smaller country resists, they're the ones that are actually being unreasonable. Okay. Now there may be a limit to that. Now let's say the bigger country genuinely just wants to annihilate the smaller one for no good reason. That's never happened in history. Whatever you believe, that's never once happened. But let's say it did. Okay. Then the smaller country would be justified in resisting that. Okay. That would be fine. That's not a might makes right situation. But the way war actually works is that each side has a position, a genuine, justified position, and the bigger side is going to win over the smaller side. The smaller side, they can maybe put up a fight, they can push back here and there, but if there's like a full-scale war that breaks out, I'm sorry, but they have to be the ones to blame, right? Because they need to understand their position. They're weaker, they don't hold cards, and unless they've got some big, strong allies behind them who are actually behind them, not just in name, then they need to capitulate. Frankly, you have to negotiate peace. You have to find some way to find a peaceful outcome. Otherwise, you're just sentencing your country to death. But that's actually the only thing that's going to happen. So in the scale of like a country, I'd say yes, might makes right. It needs to be respected. On smaller scales, not necessarily true. Okay, just because some guy is bigger than you doesn't mean he's justified in bullying you, pushing you around. So on the smaller scales, not really, but on the biggest scales, yes. And in the biggest scale, God, yes, God is good and He is Almighty. So it all comes down to that to me.
Right. And I think I would agree. Like, there's definitely, I would say pragmatically, it is always true, right? No one can argue that that's the case. But from a morality perspective, yeah, it's really kind of just echo what you said. There are times where might equals right in a good way, and that's a larger scale situation. But yeah, just like you said, if a bully is using the justification of, hey, I'm bigger than you, just that means it's good. No, obviously that's not good. But there's a lot of nuance there and stuff. But I don't know. Generally speaking, is there anything else you wanted to wrap up on, or?
No, I'm pretty happy with that. I think we had a great conversation today. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for checking out this episode 11 of the Maneuver Life podcast, and comment on the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll check you guys out next week.
All right. See you.